السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وعن عائشة رضي الله عنها قالت: قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: الخراج بالضمان. So this is still a hadith in the group of the prohibited transactions and the contingencies of sales, and this series talks about consumer protection basically. And this hadith has a story, but we'll explain inshallah the hadith as much as we can. Aisha radiallahu anha said, Al-Kharaj bil-Daman. Al-Kharaj, any benefit or gain comes out from any product basically, whether it's a car or a land or a servant or anything. And that is tied, al-Kharaj bil-Daman, to liability, to whoever is carrying the liability. Example, so you buy a car and you say, okay, if it has any defect, I'm going to return it within 3 days or 7 days, right? So you take it and you're using it, for example, as Uber or whatever, just as to give you a hypothetical scenario. And after a week you discover there is something wrong with the transmission and you want to return it. So the original seller would tell you, okay, well, I need all the profit that was gained during that period. So we said no. The profit goes back to whoever who was carrying the liability, the dominant during possession. Because liability, al-ghulum basically, liability comes with the profit. So the profit goes, or the gain goes to the one who was possessing it during that period, and not the original seller.
I didn't understand, because you just said the one who was carrying the liability, but the seller is guaranteeing accepting the return, so he is the one carrying the liability.
No. During that period, before discovering the ayb, the buyer is the one who's carrying the liability. Right? Because if it was stolen from him, he's responsible for it, right? If he gets a car accident, he's responsible for it. If it gets a defect, he's responsible for it. The example is actually someone bought a servant or a slave during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and after a while, he wanted to return him to the original owner because he found there was flaws. And then the original owner said, okay, well, I need all whatever he has made, basically, all the fees that he has gathered for you. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Kharaj bil-Daman, basically. The one who was carrying the liability is the one who keeps the profit. This is a very important principle in fiqh, which dictates all the transactions basically. So it's has a lot of applications, and it's 2 words, but carries a lot of has implications and applications in Islamic economy. And same thing, if a bank is, this is in Islamic finances, if the bank is financing a certain commodity, right, and then there is a defect. So let's say, and this is exactly what happened, they say we're gonna import tons of grains for you, for example, and it's coming through the ocean, and the ship sank actually. So who carries the liability? The buyer, right? Because it was not delivered the seller carries the liability because the buyer has not, he has ownership for it yet. So, and goes on, and all these principles lie in this hadith, So it's very well known principle in Islamic finance and Islamic economy.
So I have a question on this thing. During the Qurbani Eid, so someone buy a goat or sheep or cow, whatever money may be, he paid for partial money or full of the amount. And during this time, it was died. So what would happen in that case?
So if it died before delivery,
Yes.
the seller is the guarantor here. If it died after delivery and there was no option period, you say, okay, typically, and we learn, always put an option period, right? Say, okay, I'm gonna try it for 3 days. I'm gonna, own it for 3 days and see if it has any flaws, any defects or not. So if there is no option period, then the buyer is responsible after delivery and after had full control and full position over it. طيب. Next hadith. وعن عروة البارقي رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أعطاه دينارا يشتري به أضحية أو شاة فاشترى شاتين فباع إحداهما بدينار فأتاه بشاة ودينار فدعا له بالبركة في بيعه فكان لو اشترى ترابا لربح فيه. So this is also a very famous hadith in Islamic transactions. Urwa al-Bariqi radiyallahu anhu was a merchant. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam gave him a dinar to buy him a sheep for udhiyah, for sacrifice, for qurban. It's the season of qurban now. So Urwa went to the market, and instead of buying one sheep, he bought two. And on his way back, someone wanted a sheep, so he negotiated with them. So he sold them the sheep for 1 dinar. So now he has a sheep and a dinar.
That means he bought two for 1 dinar.
For 1 dinar. He bought the 2 sheep for 1 dinar. And then he sold 1 for 1 dinar on his way back.
That's smart.
So then he goes to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, says, this is a sheep and this is your dinar. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam made dua for him. He says, Allahumma barik lahu fi safqati yamini. So give him barakah in whichever his right hand deals with all the transactions he gives. So in this hadith, the narrator says, if he would buy dirt, he would make a profit. In a different hadith, they said, he would go to the market and people have not even started buying and selling, and he had already made a profit and came back home. Subhanallah. So this is the barakah of the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, which shows you the barakah. The barakah means invisible increase in profit, in time, money, wealth, health, all that stuff. So the hadith is a little bit complicated actually, more than that. So, and this is what we're talking about sales, so we have to dig deep, right? So this is an example of what they call an aqd al-mawquf, an aqd al-mu'allaq, meaning suspended or contingent contract. How is that? That Urwa had no right to do what the Prophet ﷺ did not order him to do, right? But then he saw there was an interest for the Prophet ﷺ, and then he bought and sold on his behalf. The Prophet ﷺ told him, you go buy one sheep, right? But he went beyond and then had two transactions, had two sheep instead of one sheep, right? And then sold the other sheep. So this is what they say, the original person, the one who authorized them, if he authorizes the transaction, then it goes through. If not, it does not go through. Does that make sense? Meaning, this is what happens if someone is the custodian or the guardian for orphans, or you have a broker. You say, okay, you know what, I thought this was a good deal and I want to buy you something extra. Well, let's say that it was half a dinar, and then he came back with two sheep. Well, the Prophet ﷺ said, I only ordered you one sheep. You cannot give me two sheep, right? So he can return one sheep and Urwa will be responsible for the price. So unless it is authorized, this is the proxy sales is not allowable unless it is authorized by the original person. If there was maslaha, and this is someone who would trade for the orphans a lot actually. If there was a loss, he would take the loss. If there was a profit, the profit goes to the orphans. Is that clear? So, bay'ul wikala. So this is what we call the contingent or suspended contract. It only goes through if there was benefit to the original person. Otherwise, it doesn't go through. Right? So that's one thing. Anything else in the hadith?
You can make 100% profit.
And this is exactly what they said. You can make 100% profit if there was no extortion or exploitation of the consumer, and if he knew about the prices, right? Because they say here that person probably didn't want to go back to the market and look for a sheep. He saw something, he looked, said, you want, I can pay whatever you want. Yeah, and then he bought it for 1 dinar, right? In general, they say, what is the hubn? What is how would someone get cheated on if there was an increase of the price of what percentage? They say if it's over a third, over 30%, then that is considered hubn. So meaning you go, and this is basically in the market, you can raise your price above your neighbors, so long it is not over 30%. Otherwise, that's considered hubn basically. So, and in this case, the buyer, they say, probably he knew the market, he knew what the prices are, and he was satisfied. So if it was a mutual satisfaction, mutual agreement, then it is okay. Because he sold it for twice as much as he has acquired it for, right? Unless there was one for like 3/4 of a dinar, one for a quarter, Allahu A'lam. So, and that goes to what we mentioned before. Inna Allah huwa al-musa'id, right? Allah is the one who sets the values for things, and the profit could be increased if there is no basically monopoly, as we mentioned, the ihtikar, if there is no extortion, if there is no exploitation of the consumer. Clear?
I mean, in other words, his effort was part of the sale, his effort of going to the market and coming back, so that's
Right, I mean, he selected the right sheep, there's, the convenience and the delivery basically has value as well, yeah.
Question about with the current Islamic financing for houses, when there is a co-ownership between the buyer and the bank, so who, at the end of the day, the liable person is the buyer, not the person who's quote unquote paying towards the mortgage. But in reality, the owner is actually the bank. Yeah, so how does it play in this?
Well, it's not, on the paper, it's not the bank.
So that is an area of dispute actually. When we talk about Islamic mortgage here in this country specifically, there is not a full kosher halal Islamic finance. And this area is always disputed because the buyer would carry the responsibility, the liability, and that's not right. So, and in the contracts, we always look for this particular area because everyone tell you, oh, this is Islamic. Well, if Islamic, you have to be liable for the portion you own. And most of the companies now, they're fixing it basically. So, and not all the provisions are Islamic actually. Some of them are out of control because the federal laws require certain things. And some of them because everyone wants the gain, everyone wants the ghunm without ghurm, or the kharaj without taman. And this is what we tell him, al-kharaju bil-taman, basically.
So in this example, who is liable?
Which example?
The Islamic finance of a house. Who's liable or both?
The owner should be, everyone should be, they split the liability. If it's 70-30, 70-30, everyone should be liable for the portion they own.
But bank is not, say bank is 70% liable. Bank is owning it, but bank is not using it. So during the usage of the house, say for 10 years, the house old, it get, damaged or something. Responsibility is both, but the owner making the house dirty or...
Yeah, that's, for the use or whatever, just like the lease. When you lease a house, you're responsible for certain parts. But let's say that apart, Harvey comes and hits, who's going to be responsible? It should be the owner. Does that? No, it should be the owner, not both. Based on their shares, basically, 70-30, 50-50, whatever it is. The use and the damage, that's the user, that's the tenant, that's a different story. But let's say you're out of the country and someone comes and puts the house on fire. Who's responsible for it? It should be the owner. So that's why it's about being fair and just. This is Islamic finance. In the capitalistic system, where the profit goes, the one with credit, the one with more money, the one with more protection, right? Islam makes it fair to the owner, to the buyer. And as you can see, there is a lot of protection for the consumer. When you go buy a house, what protection do you have? Zero. You just have to sign, these 50 pages and you have no rights. And if you don't agree, the transaction doesn't go through, right? So here, Islamically, it has to be fair and it has to be right for both. And this is why we're going through a series to show you what's it like in an Islamic model. Yeah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله والحمد لله.
It's very